The night was already old when Judas left the upper room. The city of Jerusalem was quiet, in the way cities only get quiet when something enormous is pressing down on them. Narrow stone streets, torchlight flickering against walls. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice and went silent. The air smelled of smoke and olive wood, and the faint sweetness of Passover meals still drifting from open windows above. He walked fast, not running, but fast. His sandals hit the stone in a rhythm that felt almost mechanical, like his body had already decided where it was going before his mind fully agreed. The bag was in his hand, 30 pieces of silver. The weight of it was specific, particular, not heavy enough to feel like a decision, and yet somehow the heaviest thing he had ever carried. He knew where to go. He had already been there once. The meeting had been arranged days earlier, quiet and private, in the kind of space where men speak in low voices and no one writes anything down. The chief priests had listened. They had nodded. They had counted the coins into his palm without ceremony, the way men pay for something ordinary, something already agreed upon. Now, the agreement was nearly complete. What was moving through his mind during those minutes, no account survives clearly enough to say with certainty. Ancient texts offer fragments. Intentions debated across centuries. Some believed he acted out of disillusionment, others suggested desperation. A few ancient sources hint at something darker, a kind of internal collapse that had been building for longer than anyone around him realized. But whatever it was that drove him through those streets that night, one thing remains clear in every account. He had made his choice. And the night was already moving forward without asking his permission. The garden was called Gethsemane. It sat at the base of the Mount of Olives, just beyond the eastern wall of the city. Olive trees old enough to have stood there for generations, shadows between them deep and layered. The air cooler there than in the streets, the kind of stillness that feels deliberate. He had been there before many times. It was a place they returned to, a familiar place. That was the point. He arrived with a group of men behind him, temple guards, according to the accounts, lanterns and torches moving between the trees, the light throwing long shadows across the ground. Metal sounds, the soft percussion of weapons and armor cutting through the silence of the garden. Someone coughed, someone whispered, and then the sound of footsteps through dry grass as the group moved deeper into the darkness beneath the trees. Jesus was already there. What happened in those next moments has been described in 4 separate accounts, each one preserving a slightly different detail, a slightly different angle, the way witnesses always do when something too large to fully absorb is happening directly in front of them. But all 4 accounts agree on one image above everything else.
Indeed.
The greeting, the closeness of it, the deliberate and specific nature of what Judas did next. He walked forward. He called him by name or by title, depending on which account you follow. And then he leaned in, a gesture so ordinary it existed in every household in Judea, a greeting between people who knew each other, an expression of warmth or respect or affection,
My friend.
except it wasn't. It was a signal, agreed upon in advance. That was how the guards would know which man to take. The arrest happened quickly after that, voices rising in the dark, movement between the trees, a moment of confusion, of resistance, one of the disciples reportedly reaching for a weapon, and then the guards closing in and Jesus standing at the center of it in a stillness that every account describes as deliberate, chosen, as though he had already seen all of this from a distance and had walked toward it anyway. And Judas stood somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, watching. What he felt in that moment, whether he expected something different, whether the reality of what he had set in motion landed with a weight the original planning had somehow not prepared him for, no account from that night records his expression. No one appears to have been watching him. Everyone was watching Jesus. The guards moved through the trees with their prisoner. The torchlight pulled away through the garden, footsteps fading back toward the city. And the garden returned to silence the way places do when something irreversible has just passed through them. The hours that followed moved the way hours move when history is happening faster than human beings are designed to process it. Somewhere before dawn, in the courtyard of the high priest's house, fires were burning to push back the cold. People gathered in small groups, servants, soldiers, bystanders drawn by noise and rumor, the way people always are when something significant is close by. Judas, according to the accounts, was not there. The trial, if the night's proceedings could be called that, moved rapidly. Jesus was brought before the high priest, then before Pilate, the Roman governor, then briefly to Herod Antipas, and back to Pilate again. The city was waking up around all of it, morning arriving in stages, pale light touching the tops of walls and rooftops, while in the streets below, crowds were beginning to gather, and the noise was slowly building towards something. Judas apparently heard what was happening, or saw it, or received word through whatever channels information moves through in a city at that level of tension. According to the Gospel of Matthew, at some point during the morning, after it became clear that Jesus had been condemned, Judas went back to the chief priests and the elders. He brought the 30 silver coins with him. He set them down. He said something close to an acknowledgement of guilt that he had handed over an innocent man, according to the account. The priest's response was cold, almost dismissive. They had what they needed. What happened next was no longer their concern. That was the word they used according to the text, or something close to it. His problem now, not theirs. He threw the coins onto the temple floor. The sound of them scattering, 30 pieces of silver against stone, appears in the account with a specific kind of clarity. The kind of detail that survives because someone was there, or because the image lodged itself permanently in the memory of whoever heard the story first and passed it on. A small and specific sound in a very large and echoing space. Then he left. The accounts diverge in their geography of what happened next. Matthew describes a field purchased later with the returned coins, a place that acquired a name in Aramaic meaning something close to field of blood. The book of Acts describes events at that same location in different terms, a different sequence, details that have occupied historians and theologians for centuries of careful disagreement. What both accounts agree on is the ending, that by some point in those final hours, Judas was gone. The city outside continued without pause. The sound of crowds, voices carrying over rooftops, the movement of soldiers, the machinery of an execution proceeding through its stages under a sky that, according to multiple accounts, began to do something strange around midday, a darkness descending that witnesses struggled later to explain. Some believed it was literal. Others have suggested the language was metaphorical. The early records make no clear distinction. Somewhere in the hills outside the city, or in a field near the valley below the southern wall, or in whatever specific place the accounts are attempting to describe from different angles, The silence was already settling. Judas was 30 pieces lighter, and the morning was nearly gone. Historians have spent 2,000 years circling the question of what drove him. The motivations assigned to him across centuries range from greed to ideology to despair to something even stranger, a kind of fatalistic cooperation with events he believed were destined to occur, as though he saw himself not as a betrayer, but as a reluctant participant in a script already written. Ancient Gnostic texts, suppressed and rediscovered, frame him in entirely different terms, as a man acting under instruction, as a figure more complex than the role history assigned him. None of those interpretations resurrect him. None of them change what the morning of that Passover Friday looked like from ground level. What remains, stripped of theology and interpretation, is a sequence of human moments. A man walking through a city at night with coins in his hand, a garden and torchlight, and a greeting that meant something different from what it looked like. A decision made and then immediately, irreversibly, unable to be unmade. And then the long hours between that moment and the end, hours during which the world continued to move, and Judas moved through it carrying something no amount of silver could have prepared him for. The coins were returned. That detail survives in every version. He didn't keep them. Whatever else history argues about his intentions, about his character, about whether he understood what he was doing or convinced himself of something that made it feel survivable, he didn't keep the coins. They ended up on the floor of the temple, cold, scattered. The priests eventually used them to buy a field for burying strangers. A practical decision. Religiously, they couldn't put blood money back into the treasury, so they bought land, a field, and it still carried a name when the early accounts were written down. A name everyone in Jerusalem apparently knew, the kind of name a place earns when something too heavy to carry has been left there. By the time the afternoon was done, by the time the crowds had thinned and the city began to settle into a stunned and complicated quiet, Judas was no longer part of the story that people were telling each other in doorways and alleyways and around fires. The story had moved on without him. He remains one of history's most examined figures and one of its most isolated. 2,000 years of commentary have not resolved him into something simple. The betrayal is the one fixed point every version agrees on. Everything around it, the why, the internal weather of those final hours, what he believed he was doing and what he realized too late, has never fully resolved. What the night left behind was not answers, just the stone streets, the empty garden, the scattered silver on a temple floor, and somewhere outside the city, a field that would carry its name for a very long time. Some silences last longer than the events that created them. This one has lasted 2,000 years.